just adjust your postures, as always. And just remind yourself that this practice is not a big deal. Every practice stands by itself, and we free ourselves of all expectations. And the best way in which to do this is by simply releasing all of our previous practices. Remembering that when we hold on to good practices, we've all had wonderful practices, and sometimes it's not even a practice, like we were saying. You could be standing in an art gallery, you could be watching the sunset, you could be with one of your animal friends, and you reach that state of alignment. Whoops, I think so. You reach that state of alignment, and now the only difference is that we're going to be doing it in this tiny little room, this virtual room. I'm going to ring the bell now so that we can release all of our past practices. So that we have nothing to compare this practice against. And I'm not just doing that to protect myself. It's really just about, as I was mentioning, if you've had a wonderful practice or a moment of alignment in your past, that becomes the standard. You become very attached to it. You attempt to recreate that in every practice because you know what the definition of happiness is to you. And you attempt to recreate it. And in attempting to recreate it, you do a meditation. You strive in the meditation. You try in the meditation to recreate that experience. And so we release all good practices. We release, in fact, everything in the past, everything that happened prior to the ringing of this bell. And in the same way, each and every one of us here, we've had turbulence in our lives. And sometimes we've experienced turbulence while practicing meditation. And so if that's been your consistent experience, then you'll approach this meditation with a little bit of concern, a little bit of anxiety, not knowing what to expect, expecting the worst, in fact. This bell is to release all of those bad practices, reminding yourself that there isn't actually anything like a bad. There is no such thing as a bad practice. There is no such thing as a good practice. All there usually is identification with the mind or rising above the mind. And for most of us, we've defined good and bad practices simply based on the state of the mind. Still very much identified with the mind. But in today's practice, we start off by simply giving ourselves permission to be angry, to be sad, to be turbulent, to let the mind take whatever form it chooses to, move in whatever direction it wants. Because we'll simply Raise ourselves above the mind, above the thought process. And here's the bell for that. And you can pretend that you are an aeroplane. And right now, the aeroplane's on the runway. And it's gathering up its momentum, it's gathering up its speed, and with this bell, it takes off. And soon it has to move through a thick layer of clouds. And this is where we notice our mind, our thoughts, the way we feel, the sounds around us, the sensations within our bodies. And the plane, it moves through this thick layer of gray clouds where there is no clarity, where there is no sunlight, where there are no blue skies. But there is a knowing that there are blue skies above, there is sunshine above, and with the ringing of this bell, we drift, we rise above the clouds, where the air becomes clear, where the skies, they might be blue, or it might be a magnificent sunset, or even the night sky with countless stars and the satellites flashing all around you. But clear clarity. And you take in a deep breath because you enjoy this clarity. Your ability to focus. Breathing in deeply, deeply, deeply. Breathing out slowly, 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 and things begin to slow down. Not because your mind has stopped moving, not because you've stopped thinking, but simply because you have moved above your thoughts. Where you now have the ability to observe your thoughts from above. But that does sound a little bit lofty, doesn't it? Because we do live on this planet called Earth. We have our relationships, we have our work, we have our studies, we have our homes and our bills and all of that. So instead of moving to a cave or separating ourselves from the world, we merge the two by simply observing the clouds and noticing how every cloud, no matter how long or wide it may be, has a gap. And we begin to dissolve into the space, this clarity, this wisdom, this kindness. And by dissolving, I simply mean relaxing our muscles, relaxing the nerves that move through our skin, that give us the different sensations that we're experiencing, loosening the ligaments, the muscle within the bone. And then with the next few bells, no longer seeking to distinguish your body from its surroundings, almost as though your body were made up of watercolor, were drawn, as we were speaking about earlier, art, as though the body were a piece of art made up of watercolor, and now water begins to drip, dissolving its borders, blurring the borders like one of those paintings, becoming the space. And when I say becoming the space, it's actually more a remembering. It's more a remembering. As many teachers remind us, this body is nothing more than atoms and molecules that reflect light. And you may have already discovered that with your eyes closed, you've started to have glimpses into a vastness, a spaciousness that transcends your body, that transcends form. You can call it life. And we often begin by calling it my life, our lives. But this is the very life within every atom, within every molecule. Atoms and molecules that exist for millions and millions of years, but simply change form. And the scientists, they tell us that our bodies, there are atoms and molecules within our bodies that would have existed hundreds, thousands of years ago. We share atoms and molecules that made up the bodies of our teachers, be it Christ, Buddha, Muhammad, Moses. Just as they stared upon the same sun and moon, many of their atoms and molecules continue to exist within this body, within this form, which is dissolving, not diminishing, but simply growing, so as to envelop and include the furniture around us. So as to include the walls around us. more importantly, to include the very air that surrounds us, that interacts with our skin, our clothing. And the space, it goes on, bathing the streets and the city and the town and the continents and the islands and the planet that you live in, that we live in. Finding those very gaps in between the clouds and merging with that observer, merging with that witness that at the start of this practice brought us high above the mind, both parts merging, both parts a part of the same oneness. And this is how we live in this world. From this point onwards, let this practice be more significant than we had ever planned. Let this moment be imprinted within the core of our being, that we may continue living with the people around us, amidst the work, the study, the play and the pain. But with an awareness that it is all one, with the ability to experience from above the whole of our existence. Becoming one of kindness, of wisdom. Wisdom simply because it sees the unity in every atom and molecule. Wisdom because it sees the unity in the diversity. That every form, whether human, animal, plant, even rock and earth, are but one, intrinsically connected, indivisible, broadening our definition of life. So that it may include everything that we can perceive of through our five senses, so that it includes everything that we can think of with our minds, so that it includes everything that is beyond our mind and comprehension of the senses. In this practice, this is probably the only practice in in the whole world where not knowing becomes a virtue. Because knowing simply refers to that which is contained within the mind. And in this practice, we move beyond the mind, leaving everything that we know behind or below, as we simply sit and breathe. And if this gets a bit too much for the mind, it can be simplified by simply stepping into the present moment. Because just like the space that is above the clouds, in between the clouds, and underneath the clouds, just like the space that blankets every mountain, every valley, every ocean, and every inch of land, it is like the present moment. Always the present moment. Eternally the present moment. And all we need to do is to be here in the present moment. And let us now turn this practice into one of simplicity, of simply being here now. Using some of the senses which make up our bodies. The sense of sight, the sense of hearing, the sense of touch that covers every surface of our body, including the nasal passage. The sense of smell, the sense of taste, our doorways into the present moment. And starting simply with the sense of hearing, using this bell to bring you even more deeply into the present moment. Recognizing how, in addition to the sound of the bell, you are surrounded by many, many other sounds. Some of them are loud and some of them are soft. Many of them unnoticed. A few of them noticed. Some of them liked. Some of them disliked. Knowing how just this awareness of sounds allows us to observe the way in which our mind reacts to these sounds. Sometimes particular sounds, sometimes combined and generally. But this is a practice where we observe the way in which the mind reacts and dances with the sounds, liking some, disliking some, finding some too loud and others too soft. But our practice involves the observation of these likes, these dislikes. And if you are a more visual person, then putting little sticky labels On each and every one of these judgments, we'll call them judgments. So you hear a car honking or a dog barking outside your window, or or an alarm, a house alarm going off. You might label it as something I don't really like, just not liked. But the sticky label, it sticks on it. And can you notice how when you put a sticky label on it, it moves. It moves with the sound. It moves with the clouds, in fact. The clouds are constantly moving. The thought process is constantly moving, and we let the clouds take these little sticky notes with them. And we sit. And we breathe. As we allow these to simply drift away, waiting for those gaps, those spaces in between the clouds. And now the sense of touch, which envelops the whole body, beginning simply by attempting to first identify those parts of the body that are exposed, that don't have clothing on them, the face, the neck. For me, it's my hands. And seeing if you can measure the temperature of the air around you. And then discovering if you can feel any movements. Because the air around you is moving. But you need to be very sensitive in order to pick up on these subtle movements. And there's nothing you should be experiencing. So if you are experiencing stillness in the air around you, then that's exactly what you should be experiencing. But there is one part of the body where movement will be quite vivid, the movement of air, that is, and that would be around the nostrils, around the nose, within the nose. See if you can bring your full attention, your full and complete attention to this movement of air blowing in and out, starting with subtle little recognitions, such as which nasal passage you're breathing through at this moment. Just starting there. For myself, I'm breathing through my right nasal passage. What about you? And then from there, just reminding yourself that every breath is unfolding in this moment, in this present moment. And at this moment, every breath becomes a doorway into the present moment where that leads you from your past into the stillness of this moment. A doorway that leads you from everything you have envisioned in your future into this moment. And then tuning into the direction of the airflow. Not even seeking to label it. But as you sit back, as you let go, you notice that the mind begins to become very curious as to the very reason we're giving attention to this region of the body where there are nothing but sensations. And then the mind, it decides to help us to decipher the sensations, to tell us which direction the air is flowing, because it is the mind that learned what an in-breath is, what an out-breath is. And so now, you know what an in-breath is, what inhalation, which breath represents the inhalation, and which breath the exhalation. And soon you begin to recognize the quality of the mind and how the mind gets bored very easily because of how used it is to being stimulated. It likes being interested it likes its books, it likes its art, it likes its stories, it likes funny people stimulating conversation. And when all of that isn't there, or when all of that is there, sometimes it even gets bored. It gets bored with the people, with the toys, and then it begins to create problems. It begins to build up stories. It can be that can be quite distressing at times, and perhaps the very reason many of us have joined into practices such as this, where we may rise above our thoughts so as to better understand its movements, developing a new relationship with our mind, with our thought process, one that is based on this shift, from identifying with it to becoming the very space that surrounds the thoughts, an infinite space of kindness and wisdom. And when the mind gets bored, it's when you're practicing, all you need to do is toss it a few new things to do. So from direction, ask it to explore other sensations such as temperature. And so it begins to pick up on the temperature of the breath in. And then it might get a little excited when it discovers the humidity levels, how almost mysteriously by magic, the outflow has become so much warmer, so much more humid. And sometimes you'll get glimpses of how quiet the present moment really is. That peace that emerges in between the clouds, those gaps in between the thought process. And that's what it's like to shift identification from the moving clouds to the eternal space. And many of us, we stay on par with the clouds. That's why you find yourself feeling quite peaceful. It's sometimes glimpses, usually little glimpses of silence, of stillness, of kindness, of love, of the unconditional nature. And then almost as quickly, covered in cloud and mist and confusion and frustration and anger and sadness and loneliness, until the next gap appears. Which is why in this practice we like rising above the clouds. Because just like the plane, it's a little quieter up there. It's a little quieter up there, and it's not separated from the earth because it is a part of the earth. We remind ourselves it's the very same space we experienced through those gaps. It's the very same space we experience underneath the clouds. It's the very same space that bathes the whole planet, that nourishes every leaf, every lung, every living thing. And now I'm going to ring the bell. An opportunity to change postures, to stretch, to move, to have a sip of water. But before I ring the bell, see if you can bring a sense of continuity to the practice. And even if you don't want to move, try to give yourself a nice stretch. But practice something called movement meditation, because we want this practice to be incorporated into our lives, into every movement that we make, whether we're making a cup of tea or coffee, or whether we're shopping or walking or exercising, or even getting ready for bed. We want to simply recognize that every movement awards us the opportunity to align. So here comes the bell. It might be a stretch, it might be the lifting of a glass of water or a cup of tea that you have in front of you. And now in this part of the practice, we'll move through a short body scan, one which we will call a healing meditation, one in which we bring our bodies back into balance. And if you'd like to visualize this practice, basically it's like remembering. It's a practice of allowing. It's a practice of balancing. It's a practice of well-being. And the way in which to imagine it is as though you were holding a balloon and you were pushing it under water. Imagine yourself doing that, holding a balloon and then pushing it underneath a surface of water, whether a swimming pool or a bathtub. Feel the pressure building up within the balloon. Notice how slippery the balloon is, how it's trying to slip, how you need to use a lot of effort to hold it underwater. That's what identification with the mind is like. Because it brings in a lot of effort. It takes us out of balance. Because when we remember traumatic or difficult periods in our past, and the body does not have the ability to distinguish between a thought and the present moment. And so the body believes that past event is happening right now in this moment. Muscles become tense, gastric juices are released, hormones, adrenaline is released. We get ready to either fight or flee. And in this practice, we'll simply remind ourselves to be present in this moment. And being present in the moment is the equivalent of letting go of the balloon. So now, having held the balloon, struggled holding the balloon underwater, just releasing it, and with the ringing of this bell, just releasing the balloon so that it begins to move upward freely. And that's what allowing is. That's how this practice is going to unfold. My voice is going to guide you towards different parts of the body where you will simply release any tightness or tension that you discover. And if you're already relaxed, then relaxing it a little bit more. And if you're as relaxed as you could possibly be, then allowing that body part to simply dissolve and merge into the space and the light around you. Beginning with the forehead, loosening the skin, relaxing the thin layer of muscle underneath the skin, relaxing the scalp and the sides of the head and the back of the head. And this bell, almost as though you were inviting the sound waves in through your forehead so that it moves through your brain. This precious, precious organ, computer, whatever you want to call it, that makes up such a small part of our body but uses up 20% of the energy that we consume, that we produce. Relaxing the brain, allowing it to rest, allowing it to enter into a deep state of being. The hormones and the chemicals being released within the brain, those of balance, of ease, of comfort, even of happiness, whatever that means to you. And the facial muscles, the skin with its nerves that surround your face, that allow you to experience the air, the temperature, the eyelids, the cheeks, the skin around the eyes, the underneath all of this, the jawbone, the loosening of the jawbone, and the mouth. Just being here, being present. Still noticing those little bubbles from the past that attempt to pull the balloon back down, but using the bell to release, to let go, to allow the balloon to surface, to allow the balloon to dance on the surface of the ocean or the sea or the bathtub. Free, joyful, at ease, allowing, well-being. And the muscles around the neck and within the neck. And the shoulders, allowing the shoulders to drop. Experiencing the weight of your arms as it weighs down on the shoulders, as they pull the shoulders down. Your elbows loosening themselves, developing the ability to distinguish between the outer shell of the elbow and the inner. Bend. Your wrist loosening itself. Your hands with their fingers. Noticing how bent or how straight your fingers are. Relinquishing, releasing any remaining pockets within those tiny little joints that make up your fingers, that were once the fingers of a tiny little baby not long ago, in a moment called the present moment. Remember that baby? no past, no future. Expressing every possible and conceivable emotion that arose, crying when hungry, smiling when happy, completely allowing, not filtering. Allow, allow all your experiencing to flow through you, knowing that you are not being judged at this moment. And if you are the only one who's judging yourself, and then releasing the need to judge yourself. Because that's what the balloon, that's what it's like, being the free balloon that drifts, that floats, that bumps from one ripple to the next, one wave to the other. This awareness spreading through your chest and your stomach, and all of the digestive processes going on within, all of the organs within the chest and the mid regions of the body, which we sometimes believe we have very little control over, but simply releasing an intention, a single intention that let there be well-being. The very same well-being that keeps us breathing without us needing to effort or remember to breathe. The very same well-being that keeps our hearts beating and the digestive process going. Our practice to simply really stand out of the way and allow. Rising above our thoughts, rising above our bodies. And finally, the pelvic region with the legs, the knees, the ankles, the soles of the feet and the toes, until all we're left with is a body of awareness. A body that is no longer limited to form, no longer limited to the personality that's been created by the mind, but a personality that is at one with all that is. The whole planet, which is again beyond the comprehension of our mind, with every blade of grass, every tree with every branch with every leaf, every branch with nests, with birds, with squirrels, all forms of life, people, sitting, breathing, and now the final bell. Where to the best of our ability, we bring this presence with us. We bring this kindness with us. We bring this stillness with us. As we move from moment to moment and breath to breath, seeing through the freshness of new eyes, eyes of kindness, years of kindness. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That was beautiful.
It's a pleasure.